Good morning. Good morning. Has everyone had a chance to sit down? I'm Robert Silver. I'm editor of the New York Review of Books, the co-host of our meeting with the Fritt Ord Foundation. And today we start with the very controversial question of multiculturalism. And we have two very distinguished speakers, and they both contributed strongly to the debate over that question. Now, our first speaker is Unni Wikan. She's professor of sociology at the University of Oslo. She's taught at Harvard, at Chicago, at LSE. She's particularly known for her moving book, In Honor of Fatima, Murder and Shame, the story of a young woman with the victim of an honor killing in a Kurdish family in Uppsala in Sweden. An example of multiculturalism turning into tragedy. She's made it clear that she's by no means hostile to Islam in principle, but she's been critical instead of the particular attitudes in the West, both toward immigrants and by immigrants. Our second speaker, Kwame Anthony Appiah, he's professor of philosophy at Princeton, and he's taught philosophy in his native Ghana. Now, in his articles, his many articles, in the New York Review and in his book, Cosmopolitan Ethics, he's argued that there has been in America and elsewhere a multiculturalist misunderstanding. In education, the primary demand of multiculturalism, properly construed, must be to teach mutual tolerance and respect, not to force young people to live and learn in separate spheres defined by the culture of their race or their religion or their ethnic group. And to this liberal vision of diversity, he has brought his own original concepts of cosmopolitanism, which holds that since there are, in the ranges of cultural difference, so many values, so many different values worth living by, those who are sure that their own are the right ones must not be allowed to impose them on others, allowing no peaceable choice. Now, in matters of culture, he asks why, and asks controversially, why, instead of the proud, self-promoting, ethnic possessiveness that has become so familiar, why should there not be a cosmopolitanism of enjoyment of the creations of others? A sharing. Now, Unni will speak first, and then Anthony, and then each will, I think, consume in something in the 25-minute range, and then we'll have time for questions. First, Unni. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm honored to be here today. On February the 4th, 1998, a 22-year-old Swedish Kurdish girl made use of the freedom of speech to tell her story to the Swedish newspaper Aftonbladet. She did it only after having appealed to the police for protection, but the police did not believe her story. She then thought, perhaps if I become a public figure, they will not dare to kill me. By they, she was referring to her extended family. The homeland of them was Kurdistan in Turkey. The family comprised about 1,000 members, of which about 300 were settled in Sweden. Fadime Shahindal, the girl, had lived in Uppsala with her family for 16 years at the time. Now she had fallen in love with a boy, which to her family was a disgrace. Love in over time and age is a main threat to identity politics and its vested material interests, especially if identity is seen to run in the patri line, in the father's line, as it does among Kurds and many others. It is essential to keep control of women's sexuality and chastity. Fadime's crime was not to choose a Swedish-Iranian boy, but to choose, period. She didn't have the power of choice. Seeking to show Fadime's family respect, Patrick's father and grandmother, who were Turkish-speaking Iranians, came to Fadime's family to ask for her hand. Fadime's parents agreed, but they didn't have the power of decision. The power of decision rested with men higher up in the family hierarchy, and they said no. If Fadime gets to marry Patrick, then maybe all the girls in the family may come to marry Swedes. What was at stake? The reproduction of the in-group. So Fadime was ostracized by the family and ordered into exile in Sweden. She was told by her family that if she ever returned to Uppsala, that would be the end. In a society, in a community like the one Fadime was a part of, there is no freedom of speech. There is one golden rule, and that is to show absolute loyalty to your own in-group. So Fadime had really committed the utmost disgrace in the eyes of her family. She then made use of another freedom she had in Sweden. She took her father and brother to court for their threats against her, and they were sentenced. She also participated in a documentary on her life that was shown on Swedish TV in May 1998. In this documentary, we see her brother trying to attack her physically in court and saying that he abides by Kurdish law over and above the Swedish. We hear her mother's heart-rending cries, and we hear Fadime saying how hard it is to understand that a mother who has carried her in her stomach for 9 months and given her life can come to hate her. Then the journalist says, but a mother's love cannot just die. And Fadime replies, you don't understand. I have trampled on their honor. Their honor is all that they have. No one wants to marry girls in my family because of what I have done. They will think that all are whores. The journalist then says, "Do you really think they will want to kill you?" Fadime replies, "I don't think so. I know it. I know I will live with death threats until their breath expires. It is the only way they can regain their honor, their pride." Fadime lived for nearly 4 more years. She was shot on January the 21st, 2002, by her father while meeting secretly with her mother and 2 youngest sisters. Sweden honored her by giving her what was in effect a state funeral. It was attended by Crown Princess Victoria, by the head of parliament, by the Minister of Justice, by the Minister of Integration and Equality, and other dignitaries. It took place in the ancient cathedral in Uppsala. That was Fadime's own wish. She had told friends to see to it that when she died, she would be buried next to her beloved Patrick Lindersjö. He died in a car crash 3 years before, on the very same day that he and Fadime were to have moved in together. He died while driving from Stockholm to Uppsala to meet her. Her family commented then, "Not even God is on their side." I am using Fadime's story as my entry into thinking about concepts of multiculturalism and cosmopolitanism. And because so much was said yesterday about multiculturalism, I shall primarily focus on cosmopolitanism. But first, just let me say that Fadime's story was no local or even national Swedish event. It made global news. It had transnational connections. The decision to take her was clearly taken by the larger extended family. It also had the effect of setting into motion the making of national and international laws to try to prevent these kinds of tragedies. I will return to that. Now let me move on to say something about multiculturalism and cosmopolitanism. Multiculturalism, in my view, is a dead end. It is a dead end because the word no longer works to do the kind of job it's supposed to do, to create respect for each and every person, whatever their culture, ethnicity, or religion is. As many of the speakers said yesterday, the word has become too loaded, too confusing, too dangerous indeed. So in my view, it cannot do its job, and we'd better move on to other concepts. Cosmopolitanism. Let us consider cosmopolitanism. I never thought of myself as a cosmopolitan until I read Anthony Appiah's book, which I have to admit I only did last week in preparation for this talk. To tell the truth, before reading the book, I disliked the word. it seemed to me too fancy to fit somebody like me, who thinks of myself as very much a local, even though I also feel I belong in some other parts of the world where I have lived for extended periods of time. I now realize that I was wrong. And this has been one of the delights of reading Appiah's book. You write, and I quote you, "I am a philosopher by trade, and philosophers really write really useful books." But you do. You do write useful books. You also write, I quote you, "There is a sense in which cosmopolitanism is the name not of the solution, but of the challenge." I like that, and I shall try to take you up on that challenge. I'm sure you will talk about cosmopolitanism, so I will be very, very brief. As I understand you, your book has a subtitle, Ethics in a World of Strangers. And your main point, so if I can summarize very briefly, is that we shouldn't think about strangers as others, or Muslims, or this or that. We should think about persons as human beings, whoever they are, and that we have responsibilities towards each and every one that we can affect and come to know. You write about the importance of trying to understand one another using what you call conversation, which means engaging with their experience in the kind of situations they are. Moreover, what I really like is you say we don't need to share one another's values to do so. And then you say there are limits to cosmopolitan tolerance. I quote you, "We too can see moral error, and when it is serious enough, we will not stop with conversation. Toleration requires a concept of the intolerable." You further write that cosmopolitans are committed to pluralism, but they have to be values worth living by. And if we come across values that are not worth living by, then you say, make sure they can't put their ideas into action. Okay? Now I move on to Fadime. With this in mind, let us return to Fadime's case. She was, as I see it, a cosmopolitan ahead of her time. She tried to do her utmost to engage Swedish authorities and the public in a conversation about the merits and demerits of her family's culture. She called it worldview. When they could not do so themselves, her family, her parents, because they lacked a language. To be able to converse, to speak, we need to have a language. Fadime's parents had lived in Sweden for 20 years by the time she died. Her father knew little Swedish, her mother not a single word. So she tried to kind of speak on their behalf. 2 months before she died, she gave a speech at a conference on integration in the old parliament building in Sweden. She was terrified to do so. I know from her sister, who was there when she died, I know from her best friend, who helped to write her speech, that she was very worried about her life. But she felt she had an obligation to speak. Her so-called speech in Parliament, in this, she spoke with tenderness and sympathy about her father and mother, even about her brother who had tried to kill her on the streets of Uppsala. She was at pains to make Sweden understand that her family were not monsters, but caring and responsible parents who did what they thought was best for their child. They had been raised to place the collective interests of the family over and above the interests of the individual person. She criticized Swedish integration policies. I will cite her. She said, "If society had accepted its responsibility and helped my parents feel that they had a greater stake in Swedish society, then perhaps this might not have happened. What happened to me cannot be undone." This is 2 months before she dies. But I think it is important to learn something from it and do something in the future so that such cases are not repeated. She also says, regardless of one's cultural background, it should be obvious that every young woman should be able to have both her family and the life she wants for herself. In the media, worldwide, how many minutes? Yeah, a few. I have a few. In the media worldwide, the Fadime story was presented as if all it was about was a Muslim father killing his daughter because she was in love with a Swedish boy. This is a very, it is wrong. That is not the truth. If her family had wanted to get her before, they could have managed. Fadime was not killed because of a love relationship with Patrick, even though her family was very much against it. She was killed because she broke the exile, and she was killed because in the final instance she spoke out in what her family considered to be parliament. Those were that was what really, what they couldn't take. Individuals need rights. In an article that I also admire very much, Jeremy Waldron, who will speak in the next section, he has written an article that, just if you give me 1 second, I will find where I cite from it. Here it is. There's an article, "When Justice Replaces Affection, the Need for Rights." And Waldron asks, why do individuals need rights? And to be very, very brief, time limited, he says that rights could be understood as a position of fallback and security in cases when other constituent elements of social relations come apart. And he says, he uses Romeo and Juliet as an example. He writes, I quote, "At a superficial level, Shakespeare's Romeo and Juliet is a noble and lamentable tragedy of star-crossed, death-marked love. But it can also be read as a deeper text about the dangers that beset a new and unforeseen social initiative. In this case, a romantic initiative. The point is not simply, I continue to quote, the liberal one, about the importance of individuals autonomously shaping their lives. It is also that these processes of individual thought, reflection, and change are a source of many new beginnings in the world, including new communal beginnings. I talked before about the dangers of love in a world where identity politics are thriving. Of course, love threatens to undermine identity politics, but it is also a way to make new communal beginnings by building bridging, by making connections, as Fadime and Patrick did, and many, many others. As regards rights, I think I have 5 more, 3, 4, maybe 4 minutes. Yeah. After Fadime, national in Sweden and the other countries, laws were changed to try to prevent the kind of tragedies that happened in her case. Sweden, at the time of Fadime, had, to give an example of multiculturalist policies, 2 different laws regarding minimum age for marriage. They had one general law which said that 18 years is the minimum marital age for women, for persons. Then they had a separate law saying if a girl's parents were immigrants, even if she was born in Sweden, and if in the parents' homeland there was a law saying 15 was the minimal age, then the girl, even be she born in Sweden, could be married at 15. We can ask, who did that law serve? And it was changed after Fadime's death. Norway, after Fadime's death, made a law criminalizing forced marriage. We were the first country in the world to do so. It's good to have such law. On the other hand, young people don't want their parents to go to prison. Young people, also those who grow up in so-called honor-based societies, love their families and want to have their families. So we need to have other kinds of policies to give them the rights, not... I will close saying, I think it's a great mistake to think that Islam constitutes a threat to the West. Islam can be harmonized with equality, with freedom, with democracy. There is nothing as such in Islam that should prevent that, because it all depends upon how you interpret it, and it can be interpreted to mean that those values are possible. I believe, and I strongly believe, that what is the real threat to freedom, liberty in the West for persons of immigrant, non-Western background, especially from North Africa and Asia, many parts of Asia, is the honor code as it is practiced in some such communities. And they are not just Muslim, they are practicing communities that are secular, Christian, Hindu, or Muslims. We will have to work to try together to try to change these kinds of values, habits, way of thinking that really undermines the welfare, the health, the rights of persons like Fadime, like her parents. They all had a sense of loss, and her legacy is that together we try to make for a better world. Thank you.
Very good.